allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I need a motion, please, to approve the agenda.
I'd like to make a agenda to include a recess for approximately 5 to 10 minutes prior to the calendar instruction in 5.0.
Do I have a second to amend the agenda to add a recess after 4.01? Okay, a motion by Mr. Braswell and a second by Mr. Blaine. All those in favor of amending the agenda? Aye. Any nays? Okay, 7-0. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to just have a couple of opening comments, and I'm going to give it to Dr. Baker. I just want to thank the staff for being here today, and we have some administrators, some school administrators here as well. So I just want to thank everyone from being here and some of the public as well to see the budget process and how it works and to help us work through all of this. So thank you all. Dr. Baker.
Good evening, board members and staff, and I just wanted to open with a couple very quick comments. One, tonight's work session is an extension as we continue to navigate through this budget season, but tonight is, you'll find, is more an opportunity for you as board members to ask questions, to carry on a dialogue, and to have discussion. We're just going to basically provide a few highlights and some updates since the last time that there was information presented, and it's really an opportunity for you to continue to become comfortable with where we are in the budget process prior to next Monday. The other thing that I wanted to share so that it's clear, between the time that I presented the budget, as well as Ms. Gaines, to the board, with ongoing discussions between our school division and the county, particularly myself and the county administrator, we are going tonight to amend the projected amount of revenue that we can anticipate from the county based on those discussions. And so I wanted you to be prepared that what we will be sharing is a slight reduction in that projection from what we had originally anticipated to be level funding. So I just wanted to share that, and then we also will bring more information regarding the proposed instructional calendar and the options that will be available to the board a little bit later. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. Informational items, Ms. Gaines?
Good evening, school board members. Before we get started this evening, I do want to draw to your attention some handouts that you should have in front of you. Number one, you should see the agenda. You should also see a PowerPoint. And behind that is 2 additional questions, question 21 and 22. These were 2 additional questions that came forward based on our last work session. So what we'll do now is start the work session. As indicated by Dr. Baker, tonight I'll be in and out with my comments. The main purpose of tonight's meeting will be to give you a budget recap based on what we talked about last time, give you the revised budget gap, share with you some budget unknowns, and then really seek guidance from the school board, because your next meeting, which is February 9th, that is when you will approve your budget. So if there are any changes that you want staff to make, we need to be aware of those tonight so we can make those changes. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So by way of budget recap, number one, we're going to just share with you some major budget highlights, give you an update on state and local revenues, give you an update on health insurance, and then, as indicated, the 2 additional questions. So budget highlights. Number one, this budget does include a 3% pay raise. We believe this is warranted because our employees, they are our most valuable resource. Also, this will assist us with recruitment. When you look at our employees with this pay raise, there will be no health insurance increase or VRS. We are looking to restore teaching and support positions. This budget does contain 58 positions in total. We are looking to expand instructional programs, restore stipends by 5%, increase substitute hourly rates, as well as lower the athletic fee from $100 to $75, based on the fact that when we did our survey, we had about 11 schools who were charging a fee, and our fee was one of the highest. And then when you look at non-compensation increases across the board, this is about $786,000. So state budget update. There was an article that came out on January 28th. The House Appropriations Committee is proposing a pay raise. With this pay raise, there's still some additional questions that we're trying to get answers to. Number one, February 10th is going to be a critical date. This is when the House will take their budget, pass it over to the Senate, and then vice versa, the Senate to the House. So that's going to be a key date. Based on what we're hearing, the pay raise for our teachers could be anywhere from 1% to 2%. What we do know right now, it appears to be a bottom line increase. So we're hopeful that there are no reallocations or reshuffling of funds. We'll see a bottom line increase to our number. What we're also waiting to see is what the match will be. And most importantly, is it going to be sustainable? You will recall in 2013, there was a pay raise given for certain school districts. But the following year, they came in and removed those funds. Also, what will be key is the effective date. Based on the article that we read, right now the pay raise will be effective August the 1st. So we'll keep board members posted of what we learn as we go through the budget process. Local budget update. Currently, when you look at our budget, the budget that we received from the county is $116,415,339. Based on information shared with the county administrator, with Dr. Baker, it looks like we may have a projected reduction of $615,000. So we wanted you to be aware of that. So what does that mean? Here, when you look at the picture, the blue line, it basically represents, back in 2000, what was the school division's portion or percent of the county's adopted general fund. Back in 2000, we were getting 60.7% of county general fund revenues. We reached a peak of 61.1 in 2001. Based on the projected numbers that we're looking at, we could get below 50%. The opposite has occurred with the county. Back in 2000, they were getting 39.3% of the general fund revenue. And at this point, with the projected numbers for 2016, they will be getting 50%. So the school division has lost over 11 percentage points of revenue coming from the county. So by way of the health insurance update, board members will recall that we did become self-funded back in 2011. That was a major investment that the school division did make. This was a joint effort between the county and the schools. At that time, we did save the county almost $300,000. Where we are today, we've been self-funded for almost 5 years, so we did release an RFP. But one of the things we're doing differently now, the RFP basically is about 4 phases. You have medical, you have dental, you have vision, and EAP. And the reason why we're soliciting separate RFPs, we want to make sure we're getting the best vendor for the best price. And so with that being said, we did go through negotiations with the medical vendor today, and based on that, we're projecting an additional savings of $200,000. So that will bring our gap down. Also, we want to bring to your attention that in FY16, we will be offering 4 health plans. And that is because with the Health Reform Act, we are now, to avoid a huge fee, we are required to offer a bronze plan. But what will happen is the employees will be paying the full premium. We have to offer it. And then what will happen on February the 9th, we will bring to the school board a recommendation of who you should select as your health insurance provider. The county is going through a similar process, and they'll be doing this as well with the Board of Supervisors. So you will recall when Dr. Baker presented his budget on January the 20th, the staff, under Dr. Baker's direction, did a lot of the heavy lifting. We had a budget shortfall at that time of $9.5 million. Based on the governor's proposed budget, the VRS rate did go down. That did save us $400,000. Through reallocations of funds, 1.9, primarily when individuals left the organization, they were replaced with individuals on a lower pay scale. Therefore, we saved that 1.9. We were projecting lower health insurance costs. We have been able to build up a reserve, so 2.8, we will be paying less in FY16. We are getting more federal funds, which means we can reduce the local subsidy going to our grants. And then with the ERIP program that was approved by the school board, we're looking to save in the plan year $1.5 million. So we did have a gap of 2.7. So now, based on the additional information that we're sharing tonight, in looking at the revised gap, if you take that 2.7 million, take into account that we're projecting to save an additional 200,000 in health insurance, the gap would have gone down to 2.5. But with us potentially losing an additional 600,000 from the locality, our gap has grown from 2.7 to 3.1. I did want to make mention, too, that once the final decision is made, whether the teachers will get a 1% increase or a 2% increase, we would be expecting some additional state funds to come in, and that number yet is to be determined. But we're hopeful that that number will be a significant number. In terms of budget unknowns, again, the General Assembly is not scheduled to adopt their budget until late February, early March. So by then, we'll have the final VRS rate, the final group life insurance rate. As I mentioned before, over the next few months, we'll be bringing health insurance RFPs for the school board to approve. State funding, we'll have that final number sometime the end of February, but we'll have a good picture come February the 10th. Local funding transfer, that number is to be determined. The supervisors is scheduled to adopt their budget April 14th, while the county administrator is scheduled to present his budget on February the 10th, the following night after the school board approves its budget. And then final federal funding, that's still a budget unknown, but we feel very comfortable with our projections at this point. So what we want to do today, based on our meeting that we had about a week ago, we basically went through our budget booklet almost line by line. And so we just want to get confirmation. No official voting is required. But when you look at the contracted pay increases, 3% for employees. The question is that something that the school board wants to move forward with and include in your budget that you will approve on February the 9th? In terms of non-contracted pay increases, when you look at the budget book, you'll basically see there increases for our interpreters, increases for our hourly wage employees, as well as substitute rates. When you look at non-comp increases, those went across the board, but primarily in instruction. When you look at other, you're looking at the athletic fee, you're looking at expansion of different programs. So at this time, I'm welcome, to answer any questions that you may have, and then you can provide staff in terms of guidance. What is it that you would like to see in your budget that you will be approving on February the 9th?
Dr. Meyer.
Madam Chair, Mrs. Gaines and Dr. Baker, we would now be understanding that with the gap, as we now know it to be 3.1, when we approve a budget on February the 9th, would not that gap have to be absorbed by the local transfer? In other words, the local transfer would increase by 3.1?
In the last few years, we changed the process. So what we do for the 3.1, we have created a line that says revenue gap. And that revenue gap will have its own separate line. And as we go through the process, it'll either be filled with county, state, or federal.
Thank you.
Very good question.
Ms. Gaines, I just wanted to go back to slide 11. Right now, we're not looking at any increases in the VRS or group life.
Correct.
So that's, as it looks right now, we don't have to worry about that changing for us.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other, yes, Ms. Gramp?
So the estimated local transfer reduction of 600,000 is primarily in debt service, right?
I'm not sure if they provided Dr. Baker, when you look at our budget, actually debt service is going up by 665,000.
Right, okay.
Okay.
And with the potential from the state program that we talked about this afternoon, that requires, it is conditional on local match,
Okay.
how much could that potentially save us?
It's going to depend on many variables. Number one, when you look at the monies coming from the state, it only includes funding for SOQ positions. Also, when you look at the funding coming from the state, they do not fund at the same salary levels that we do. They use prevailing rates. Also, when you look at the funds coming from the state, their effective date may not be the same effective date when our employees start their contract. So there are many variables. So I would say a range that I would give you would be somewhere between 700,000 and maybe 1.4.
And that's per percentage point that they give?
If it's 1%, I would basically say, let's say about 700,000.
And then if
they give
it's
us 2%, 1.4.
Okay.
And that's just an estimate, and I want to caveat that because there's a
Yeah.
lot of different variables.
Thank you, Ms. Gaines. Mr. Laura?
Madam Chair, Dr. Baker, and fellow board members, I speak from the heart when I say this. The staff and us have been working on this budget since about September, and we find ourselves, according to the overhead, with 3.1 gap. I am very comfortable voting on a budget moving forward with a 3.1 gap. I don't recommend to this board that we start making cuts today. Let's move forward with a 3.1 gap. Let's see, because there are a lot of unknowns. We still don't know what's going to happen in Richmond. We still don't know what's going to happen at the Harbor Building. There are a lot of unknowns. And for us, that would be the equivalent to me of throwing away everything that the staff has done. The superintendent has identified the needs of this division. Those are the needs, based on what I have seen, there's no fluff in there. So we are, if we claim to be advocate for children, let's advocate for children. And I realize I only have one vote. My vote is to move forward with a 3.1, and I hope that the rest of the board is of the same mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laura. Ms. Blaylock?
Ms. Gaines, with all we just heard from you, and I understand that the gap did increase due to what we're hearing from our local government at this point, and a lot of unknowns are coming. Are we still standing on the 3% is funded regardless?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Meyer?
Madam Chair, Mrs. Gaines represented what the House, and part of that was in the paper this morning as well. Have you heard anything of what's being proposed from the Senate side?
Have not.
Okay.
Have not. But we'll have something next Tuesday if all stays as planned.
Correct. I just curious whether anything has percolated to the top from what is being talked about. Because it was nice to read that in the paper this morning on the House version, or it came across from VSBA clip. But I didn't know if anything, I didn't see anything on the Senate. That's the reason I was asking.
Mr. Blaine?
As you were speaking, a couple of questions came up, and they've pretty much been answered. But I need to chime in with Mr. Laura for just a minute. I have a major concern. Let me back up just a moment. I think what the staff has done is outstanding, and the fact that we have such a small gap, to tell you the truth, because our needs far exceed what we show here. And our role, or my role, let me say that, is that of establishing policy. That's fundamentally where we are. And I want to talk a little bit about policy for just a couple of minutes. To properly represent our students and our children, they rely on us as a board to set policy in terms of what we feel they need and the educational program that we develop. And we had a notice about an exciting new program at John J. Wright with the intermediate students, which is impressive. And I have to look and say, if I see gaps that I feel need to be filled, we need to speak about them. And I'm really concerned with the primary grades. We're getting about 1,800 students every year that come to our schools to enroll in kindergarten. We have today about 225 or something like that children that we're dealing with at Head Start and the Virginia Primary Initiative. I've had principals tell me that significant numbers of children enroll who have never had a book in their hand. And children that come from economically disadvantaged homes often are those homes that lack that kind of background. Their parents have not spoken with them a lot. They've got a minimum vocabulary. They've not had experience with books. Maybe they've never been in a library. And that's not our responsibility. I mean, we start at kindergarten. But we have to take that raw material. And when children start and they're a couple of years behind as kindergartners, by the time they're finishing third grade, we expect them to read at third grade level, just like the kids who have known how to read when they came to kindergarten. I mean, there's a terrific range. And in order to learn, or let me say, the primary grades have one primary objective in my view, and that's to learn how to read. Because they will read from fourth grade up to learn. And if we do not give them that fundamental basis, those kids will find it increasingly difficult as they go through fourth and fifth and sixth to catch up. Some of them are never going to get to high school. And when we start to see kids dropping out, I'm willing to say that many, if not most of them, have reading problems. I don't have any statistics for that. This other stuff I'm sure about. So I would like us to look back. I've been so happy to see the reestablishment of all these teaching positions that you've been able to put, and I think that's terrific. My concern is, do we have enough teaching coaches in English or in reading and in math at the primary grades, where if a teacher needs some help, they can go right down the hallway and say, Mrs. Coach, will you come in and do whatever's necessary? So I hope that as we go through between now and next Monday, that I could ask our staff to look again at this primary level, because there's a need there. And when we finish our conversations, that 3.1 could easily be 3.6 from my standpoint. And we have the job to represent kids, and I don't think that I can feel good about being a board member if I don't come to the funding source and say, gentlemen and ladies, we have something that we're doing today that's going to, it's an investment in children that's going to last them for the next 80 years. It's not some highway that you're going to replace again in 10 years or 20 or 30 years. Because if we don't do it at third grade, it may never happen. So with that, I'd just like to say some food for thought for our discussion. And thank you.
Dr.
Madam
Meyer?
Chair, more or less a follow-up to what Mr. Blaine was talking about. And now a question. The group that you're really looking at to where you can make an impact is like Head Start or VPI, because those are the children that have the most need. Our ability to expand Head Start, I think, is pretty well wrapped around the federal guidelines. Am I not correct on that?
Head Start, correct.
Okay, now go to VPI.
VPI is limited with the local match. We do have more additional space for VPI students. We don't have additional local funds to match the VPI funds to fill the slots.
When we say slots, are those sections, or are we talking numbers of students?
Numbers of students, sir.
And what's the cap coming from the state level, then what's the gap coming from the local level?
We currently have 90 VPI students, and that number for our slots is actually slated to change, so we're waiting for that information to date. But most recently, we've had over 290 slots available. So
290.
Yes, sir. So, and we're actually expected to get additional slots for this coming year. But unfortunately, we do not have the local match to fill them, so we are slated to remain at 90 for next year.
Is that match a 50-50 match, or is it?
I'm going to bounce that over to finance, because I just fill the slots. I don't pay for the slots.
It's $6,000 per child, and it's based on the composite index. Also, if we were to expand VPI, do we have the spacing that we need, Carol?
If we bring them, we will figure it out. No, to be very specific, we do have a case-by-case situation at each school, and a lot of that also is due to the increase in special education programs. So when we have more ECSE children, as Ms. Richardson stated so eloquently last time we all met, we do need to have space in our elementary schools for those programs. So we would have to look at being creative with them, but I do know very much that from the elementary perspective, the elementary principals would love to have a preschool in every single elementary, and that way they could really connect with families at an early age. So I think that we would definitely have certain situations in certain buildings because of the size of the building and the size of that school, but we would definitely work hard to figure that out.
So that raises an additional question. Is that something that we as a board would need to do, for that to happen? If, say we have the space, we have the teachers, does that mean then we'd have to come up with, like Mr. Blaine was saying, additional funding set aside specifically for that purpose?
That's correct. We would have to have additional local funding in the local budget to support additional VPI students.
Ms. Gaines, when you said $6,000 per child, per student, is is it that we get $3,000 from the state and then we would have to match it with an additional $3,000, or is it we get $6,000 and we'd have to match it with $6,000?
Hi. The funding is based $6,000 total, state and local, and they divide the split based on the composite index.
So it's not a 50,
It's not a
50-50.
50-50. It's more like a 65-35 and a half.
Okay.
Local to 35 and a half.
Okay, any more questions about that? Because I was going to ask, goes along with Mr. Blaine's comment, but it also expands across grade levels as well. Question number 22, which was, how does the addition of new staff in our budget address the needs of our schools that have been accredited with warning? Because that goes along with making sure that our students are getting what they need as well.
Okay, I believe that Ms. Gaines provided everyone with a copy of the response to question 22. I'm going to just sort of pick out some highlights, if that's okay. So basically, the big piece that we want to make sure that we note is that
Yeah. I'm not sure what the question is.
it's really important.
We do have the answer, but I wanted it kind of for the public as well to hear, because they don't have the answer, but for us to be able to hear it in case we had any questions with the answers. Thank you, I'm sorry, Mrs. Flennard, continue.
Some bullet points, okay. I do just want to make sure that everyone is aware of the moving target of accountability and how the federal and state accountability targets are not the same, and therefore the designations for the schools can be varied, and sometimes federal and state can impact the same school. So it is very, a bit convoluted, and that is important. And the other piece is that it's also very important to note that anytime we are looking at student improvement, we are really looking at that as a division perspective. And so one of the pieces that is written in here is that the budget development process also allows us, from our perspective with the principals, to align the resources. So in other words, the 10 specific schools, when we look at coaches and we look at assignment of teachers, we do take into consideration what are the greatest needs from those schools. So the 10 schools, some of them being title alone, have additional resources because they are title. And so annually, we sit with our coaches and our Director of Teaching and Learning and Mr. Wolf, and all of us sit and we put all of this together and we analyze the data from the schools, and then we look to align our resources accordingly. The additional instructional director position that is there, Dr. Baker mentioned last time, really would support the overseeing of the state and federal accountability guidelines. It would also possibly look to support the early literacy piece that Mr. Blaine was talking about earlier. Our third grade, this is in the notes, our third grade SOLs in the area of reading are our lowest reading scores for the entire division for Spotsylvania. That is not uncommon for the state. The entire state third grade is the troubleshooting spot. But I do believe that we need to address the primary grades, K through 3, before they get to third grade, because it is not possible to catch up 4 years of schooling in 1 year. Pretty amazing piece. The middle school teachers that are in the budget would allow for lower class size, as well as they would specifically address the needs of reading resource. So you would be able to have students that do have needs. The reading resource, the reading specialist would be available and have more access to support those students. The other piece is that at the middle school level, the areas that were accredited with warning was in math. And so adding math teachers would certainly allow our class size to go down in mathematics at some specific schools. And we also would be looking at the scheduling possibilities for math. So in other words, is it possible with additional math teachers to have math every other day at certain grade levels to support instruction instead of at an A-B schedule for mathematics? We also, in looking at the second page, with the increase of our ELL population, we would look at the additional ESOL teachers to support and address the changing population of ELL students. And hopefully we would be looking at addressing the proficiency AMAO is what it's called, is the annual measurable achievement objective for the ELL population. We have not passed the proficiency rating for 4 years, which is also not uncommon across the state, but we want to be strategic in targeting that and really going after it, as well as the FGI, the Federal Graduation Index, that all of our high schools are struggling, and is also a requirement for our ELL population. So additional ESOL teachers would support that area. The general education teachers would be focused at the elementary and the high school levels. Very specifically, at the elementary level, we would be looking first at the primary grades, in looking at reducing and trying to make those class sizes the smallest that they can be. It is typically what we do now, but we do have a couple of hot spots that we would certainly like to take care of and reduce those class sizes. And also at the high school level, we would be very much looking at the core instruction to see if additional teachers could reduce some of the class sizes at the high school level. So that's a very quick and fast overview of a couple of pages that's before you, but if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Flennard. Ms. Grant?
Just informational question. I was just looking at the schools in my district, because they're the ones I'm most familiar with, and a couple of them are the Title I. Those are the ones that we have to keep K through 3 class sizes less than. So they're some of the lowest scoring, and they already have some of the smallest class sizes. So how do we think that reducing the class size is going to help that situation?
That's a great question. That's not necessarily an answer for those specific schools, because they do have a smaller class size. The piece that the specific schools also need is quite a bit of professional learning, and the document that I just handed you before talks about some of the additional pieces that you may recall as board members that we've added to our elementary literacy program in the area of reading. One of them is the benchmark assessment system by Fountas and Pinnell, and that will help very much in all of elementary, because it's, you may be familiar with the elementary K through 3 previously only used PALS. And PALS is a diagnostic test that allows us to determine the students who potentially may be struggling in reading. It's similar to an X-ray. A Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment is more like an entire body scan. So it is a much more detailed level for our teachers to be able to individualize the reading instruction. And so you may have lower class sizes, but now you have access to really understand where your students are reading. And of course, the piece that we need to continue is the professional learning for our teachers, that coaching that Mr. Blaine mentioned, to make sure that our teachers are using it effectively and really tailoring the instruction to the individualized learner.
Thank you, Ms. Flennard. Back to, I just have a question about that as well. The table that you gave us with the scores. What was the state's average, do you know, for third grade?
Not specifically for third grade, no, I
Okay.
do not have that, but I can certainly get that information and ask, I can contact the state and ask them what specifically for third grade was across the state.
Okay, because I just, that way we can kind of compare ourselves and see how we are with the rest of the state. I did, and it's on our paper, but this was a brand-new test with more technology-enhanced items, this past test.
This past test is the second year that it is, has been given. It has the increase in rigor, and yes, it does have more technology-enhanced items. The other piece is that this particular test for reading also changed its cut score, so which is very relevant. If it only took 20 questions to pass the test, well, they changed it to be actually 18 questions to pass the test. So they actually upped the rigor in regards to how many questions it took as well. So it was really two things that were complicating that.
Mr. Blaine?
I don't want with my questions to imply that I know the answers, because I do not. But I just wondered, does each of our schools have a dedicated reading specialist and coach at each grade level in the primary grades, or how does that shake out is kind of really where I'm coming from.
Right. At the elementary level, every school has one reading specialist. for all 17 that is locally funded. Some of the title schools have additional reading specialists through Title I funds, so they may have more than one. The other piece is our largest school, which is Courthouse Road, as well as based on need as well. We have 18 locally funded, and we split one of the number 18, so that just the sheer size of Courthouse Road requires more than one reading specialist. And I know if Ms. Fields were here, she would say I need at least 2 reading specialists, and she wouldn't be wrong. But we are looking to continue to expand the actual reading specialists, the role in which the reading specialist plays in the school. It is one per the entire school, not by level, not by grade level. And right now, they are primarily focused on serving students that do not pass some sort of assessment, whether that's the PALS assessment or a Fontes and Pinnell assessment, and which is also part of the professional learning, that if we can have more coaching opportunities, then our students could be served within the classroom with their teachers who have learned and have the expertise to really meet their needs within the classroom experience instead of being pulled out consistently for reading support.
You're certainly trying to address the issue that I've spoken about, there's not an answer to this question, but I have to think in my mind now, what if we had not only one, but we had 2 or 3 or 4 extras that could be shared a little bit more, and would they, relative to other things, be higher on our priority list, I guess is what I'm saying. And when we propose a budget, I'm approaching this and saying, we need to do this with our funding source at what we see as the need today, and expect that, because as I've spoken to people, I saw a man Saturday say, hey, I'm willing to spend another $100 a year on education any day of the week. And I'm very confident that the people in our community want top-notch education, and we're doing a great job in that area, but we can do better, which is where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Blaine. Mr. Laura?
I'm sitting here listening to all of you, and I keep thinking, today is Groundhog Day. I've seen this movie before. Years ago, when we started cutting school position and gutted the central office, it didn't take a genius. Ray Charles could see what was going to happen. It was predictable, and now we're paying the price. And it's like, hey, I've been here before. Now, I'll share this with you. True story. A man came to see me. He wanted to find a place to place his horse. And I gave him 3 places that he could go to. And later on, he came back to see me to see where he should. When he went to visit the first farm, they told him, we can stable your horse, feed him 3 times a day, clean up all the manure, $500 a month. So he went to the next one. Yes, we can feed your horse, we can pasture it, but you'll have to clean up the manure, $300 a month. He went to the last guy, a buddy of mine, my buddy said, $100 a month. And the guy says, what about the manure? I said, for $100 a month, there'll be no manure. That's where we are today. When I see the grade of my school going straight down, it hurts. The whole thing was predictable. And that's where we are today. All of us here in this table and out here, we have an obligation to advocate for our children, because it's not about us. It's about these little kids that have the right to get a good education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laura. Mrs. Blaylock?
Just a couple of comments, and then one last question from me is, as I sit and listen, I couldn't agree more with Mr. Blaine and the primary students, but I also want to make sure that we stay focused on K through 12 all the way. I have first graders, so I certainly understand the need for catching them young in the preschool age and as early as we can in our VPI program. and our Head Start program. However, we have middle school students. I hear a lot of constituents talking to me about strengthening the gifted program in middle schools. I could talk about support with math in that level, support with even reading in that level as well. I also have high schoolers. There is many areas that need support in our high schools as well. So as we're looking at this, I want to make sure that we are covering not just the primary, but also K through 12 completely, because I think we can say in every single area, we could talk to our principals, and they could all sit down and share with us things that would help them support our students even more than we do today. One thing I have noticed doing this as long as I've done it is that I don't think I've ever seen anybody step up to a plate like teachers and staff when they have less. Our students, and I don't feel my students, my children have suffered because we have had some bad budget years. Being able to restore some of these things is only going to enhance their already excellent education. But when we talk about the gap, I want to say this before I ask my question. I would not dare go in not trying to, with everything I have, to get this gap filled. We need the $3+ million for sure. It is a small gap for as large as we are. We are the 11th largest in the state. So we are very reasonable. It's a very prudent budget, and it's one that is an investment in all children from the day they walk into our schools to they graduate and move on, whether it be to the job force, military, community, or university level. Our goal is to get them to one of those. So we need support in our Career and Tech Center. We need to think outside the box of just the classroom. The child that's going to go for a trade needs our support, just like the child that's going to go in the governor's school and go for an Ivy League education. So just to back up that bigger picture, nothing in me will stop asking for the money just because we're hearing maybe some negative news coming from the local, maybe not getting level, hearing a little bit of positive from the state, not knowing what the Senate's going to do, all the different areas. I say this board stays steady and stays strong. Regardless of what's going on around us, we still need the $3 million. That's final. My question would be, is as we're going down this path, Ms. Gaines, I'm assuming that you all are prepared if something happens we don't.
That is correct.
And as we're preparing, we make sure that the wherever we would have to cut,
Right.
it would be more across the board. One level wouldn't have more than the other, primary, middle, or secondary. I would like, to see that very balanced.
Okay.
I certainly hope we don't get to that day, and I'm not asking for, I don't want specifics. It's not that time. We're going to close this gap, and we're going to go for that because that's the right thing to do. We could, someone mentioned, I think it was Ms. Flannard mentioned, we could use more support in schools for reading specialists. Absolutely. So I say we keep trudging forward with that mindset, but I just wanted to make sure that we were prepared if for some reason our funding didn't come to us in full.
That's correct.
We're ready to go?
That's correct. We have some criteria that we will be using to bring recommendations to the school board, but we're hopeful that we will not have to venture there.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Meyer.
Madam Chair, on slide 7, page 4 of the handout is showing a 10-year trend. And I know last year, there was trying to have discussion with the county as to where are we, getting to my question, seeing that slope going down, is there any, I don't want to use the word a target but where are we going and what's the plan? I mean, if the plan is that the locality is going to keep decreasing and we're expecting it to come from the state, or is the locality going to be, because you went from 60 down to 50, 10-point drop over 10 years, and every year it's been less funding. So I think we have to have an honest discussion, with our counterparts as to what can we truly expect in terms of funding. Last year, we had a very good conversation with them, I thought, in terms of sustainable funding, and we made the appeal that the 1.5, 1.6 that we received, and we thank them for putting it under the sustainable line, not a 1 year, one time. But it is alarming to me when we see a reduction of 600,000, almost a third of what we had garnered that we thought was going to be sustainable funding. So back to my question, I know you were trying to have discussions with the finance staff in terms of, is there any kind of a funding formula, or is any kind of, has that thought been further explored? And
At staff's level, what we've begun to do is to research other school districts who do have revenue sharing agreements. For example, like Chesterfield is one that we've actually talked to last week. So we have been working on a model that could be used at staff's level. The next level would be that of the superintendent and the county administrator, and then the boards. I do believe that the school division would greatly benefit from having a revenue sharing agreement, especially as Dr. Baker begins to plan for his long-term compensation strategy. It will be good to know what funds we can count on, which funds we cannot count on. So there are some benefits to having that.
And I guess that's my reasoning for asking this question, is that, we're trying to plan what we as the board and staff can do to make improvements the long term. We're not just a 1 year, we're looking 3 years, 5 years. And I think the same holds true, that if we need some assurance of sustainability in order to build something. We can't build it if it's on a year-by-year basis and every year it changes. We were hoping we had crossed that threshold last year, but now it appears the threshold has changed. And it really begs the question, what is that threshold? If it wasn't what we had achieved last year, then what is the threshold, and how do we know what we can count on and what we can't count on? I think it makes it very difficult. And I think when we have our meeting with them, we need to pose that question and have some honest discussion about that. More of a statement than a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer. Mrs. Graham?
I like the additions that we talked about to the chart on number 7 that we were just referring to. Can we add a yellow line for population growth from the same growth?
Student enrollment growth.
Probably student enrollment would be
Yes.
better, but since I don't know, because if we're thinking revenue, it would be not necessarily student, but county.
Spotsylvania County population growth, okay.
Yeah,
Does that,
because it's
is
the
that understood?
percentage of general fund, so everybody pays to the general fund. So I think that, or we might want both, student enrollment and county growth, just to compare it for the next work session we'll be in.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. And I'm going to tack on to what everyone else had been saying about a K-12, preschool, everything. We have to include our special education numbers are going up, and we need to continue to service them. And yes, we get some federal funding, but that is not enough to service our special education students either. So that's something else, that a number that could grow to support our students with disabilities as well. Okay. And it is mandated. Mr. Braswell?
Without repeating some of the quality comments that were mentioned previously by my esteemed colleagues, I do agree with Dr. Meyer that we need to have a planning or have an opportunity to see the Board of Supervisors and their planning to be not as myopic as 1 year at a time, that to help us look out in out years so that we can have funds that are pretty reliable as in terms of planning for assumption purposes, to be able to maintain and build a sustainable budget. So I'd like to see us eventually get to that point when we're not just being reactive year by year, and that we would have an idea that we would be pretty certain that we had some definitive numbers to be able to count on. Also, want to thank Dr. Baker and his staff again. I read at a Freelance Star with great interest that other school divisions are trying to reach a $40,000 a year mark in terms of teacher compensation. So we're leading the effort in terms of the recruiting initiative. And getting quality new teachers in at that level is critical, and I think this budget addresses that. And I'm very excited that we're leading in that initiative, and it's apparently something that other divisions find just as valuable as we do. And so we hope that our supervisors can assist us in maintaining the initiative with that. There's a lot of other things that are in the budget, and we all know what they are, and I'm really excited that we found ways to, in an incremental way, bring back some of the benefits that our employees had. A lot of times, there's a lot of things we'd like to do, and we'd like to just give everything back the way it was or the way it used to be, or we'd like to give everybody a sufficient, what we feel that we could afford as in terms of a raise, but we know that there's only so much money, and we have to offer a reasonable approach to our budget, and I think our budget is very reasonable. We're not asking for everything under the sun. We're just asking for our primary priorities to be met. And so I want to thank you, Dr. Baker, and your staff for identifying what the main effort was and making sure the main effort was being funded in our budget. And so we're going to just have to do our part and tell our colleagues at the Board of Supervisors that we think it's a very viable budget and that it's a budget that serves our citizens well. So with that being said, I yield my time.
Thank you. Any more comments from the board? So are we so our direction to Ms. Gaines and her staff, Dr. Baker, is that we will stay with what we have right now? No changes at this point? Okay, Dr. Baker.
Saying it all.
What we will be looking at next week when we have our vote on Monday, we are going to go into our vote with the $3.1 million gap. I just want to see if there's anything else that we need to ask to Dr. Baker and his staff, if there's anything else that we need to, if there's any changes, because one of the slides was, do we have any changes? Do we have any changes at this point in time?
The point that I'm trying to make is that I'm suggesting that we look at the primary grades to see if we should be adding 1 or 2 or 3 more positions. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm not at all stuck with 3.1. I think we need to propose whatever number that is, that we feel, that it's that the population of our community is in agreement with additional funding, and secondly, that it's a need that we can justify and have.
Thank you, Mr. Blaine. Dr. Meyer.
I think it goes back to what Mr. Laura said at the very beginning, but the second piece of that is, I think if I can phrase it a little differently, the way Mr. Blaine was expressing it, it goes back to the question I asked, where do we put, we're not asking staff to say that we're going to necessarily request additional funding entirely from the Board of Supervisors, because we're not putting it to the local transfer line. We're putting it as a gap that needs to be closed. That additional funding can come from multiple sources. We're just stipulating that that is the gap that we currently have, and half of it could come from the state, very possibly. Depending then how we iron out with the health insurance, and as the final budget gets, constructed, things could change, and we could still be asking of the locality to meet us halfway or whatever, that amount is. But we still, right now, what we're stipulating, and we would stipulate on a vote on Monday so that staff can create that document, is that there is a gap of 3.1. what gets back to Mr. Blaine's question is part of the activity that we get into come April and May, where we talk about how are those resources going to be used. Is there a different breakout? But right now, we have the best that can be put together that staff has prepared for us in the budget document. But final deliberations come to be the final phase, not this phase. This phase right now is, we're at this position, and we need to approve a document on Monday that stipulates that gap. And I am definitely in favor of that.
Madam Chair, you're
Mr. Law.
absolutely right that tonight is the night for us to make our peace. When we come in Monday, Monday will not be a good time
Correct.
to have a
Don't
discussion.
change it.
This is it. Say whatever you have to say so that we can make whatever Monday is pro forma. Just, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laura. Did you have something? Ms. Cramp, did you have something? Okay. Okay. Dr. Baker.
Thank you to everyone for your comments. They've been very helpful and astute throughout this discussion. I wanted to shed some light, at least from my perspective, kind of globally on not only the questions and the feedback that you've provided, but also what the staff has been sharing tonight. I think it was 2 years ago when I presented the first budget, at least since I've been superintendent, in 2013, and I recall at that time saying that the danger of finding ourselves in a series of one-year budgets is that we can fail to have the long view. And but the reality is that we've been and will continue to be working under fiscal constraints. And I do believe that when I hear Mr. Blaine speak of needs, I am 100% in agreement with him. I think that, needs-based budget is sometimes a relative term in the eye of the beholder, but I think from many different perspectives, we could certainly enhance many of the things that we have put in this budget as additional investments, as well as things that we're doing to just try to sustain ourselves. One recommendation that I would make, and it goes with some studies that we're continuing to do, not only on compensation, but when we're looking at how accountability has shifted and how it can still potentially shift with a lot of different things kind of coming together from different associations and potential legislation, I think there could be changes in what accountability looks like, some as early as next year and probably more significant over the next 3 to 5 years. And so one of the things that I would recommend is that we begin to have discussions about prioritizing additional investments in the budget over time, not just 1 year, because one thing that I would hope you'd notice, and I believe you have in this budget, is that it's multifaceted to the extent that we do not believe, as a staff, that there is one magic silver bullet that makes a one significant difference in our student performance and achievement. But we believe by putting those things together in concert and in alignment with our strategic plan that we have the greatest opportunity for success. And with that, I also want to address compensation, because sometimes compensation in our business is viewed as something outside of a focus on student learning and achievement. And I would argue that in light of not only, I think Ms. Blaylock was talking about how our staff has stepped up over the last several years to meet additional accountability requirements, to do more work individually and collectively than they've probably ever done throughout their careers, and to be doing that with significantly less resources and overall support. So compensation, as Mr. Braswell puts it, is the main effort, to the extent that we must sustain our employees as they sustain our organization and our students and enable them to thrive and meet their educational needs. I think the other thing that we know, and still a reality, is that the only certainty regarding funding is uncertainty. that continues to be the case. I think it was referenced, in my third year, we have not yet gotten to a place where we have an agreement on what the revenue sharing should look like. And I think I can't answer that question. I can only say that I think that it's productive to have those discussions. I also would attribute some of it to the continued volatility that is perceived. Even if it's not actual, there's still perceived volatility in not only the local economy, but the state economy, and to a large extent, still the national economy. So I think that creates hesitation for anyone to lock in. And I'm not saying that to justify it. I'm just saying I think that is a reality, is because when you have lived through finding yourselves in a declining position as it pertains to revenue, no one wants to be there again. So I'm just providing some comments on that. The other thing that I shared in my presentation, and I, as well as I'm sure other colleagues of mine would take responsibility for this, is you try to work with your staff to have a vision and to be able to see down the road things that are coming, but I still, and I do believe that there's appropriate advocacy taking place, but when we start looking at schools that are currently accredited with warning, with the idea that we must now find a way to direct resources to those schools solely in an effort to dramatically improve them, would ignore the reality that all of our schools, absent some fairly arbitrary numbers that have to do with things such as 3-year averages, that have to do with the complexity of a diverse student population, we are not yet in a position to look at data and say that we have a trend. And so to direct a lot of resources would say that our only challenge in reaching performance benchmarks has to do with not having enough resources. And I do believe resources play a huge part in it, but it's not only having more, but it's how do we do things differently? How do we adjust our instruction? How do we provide more targeted, enhanced professional development? How do we pay into the culture that we're continuing to try to develop here? So I'm sharing that because I think that the board hit in all of your comments on the grand complexity of trying to put together and propose a budget. And I commend you on your work. I commend you on digging deep early on in the process to understand the challenges that we have. And I am optimistic that we're going to be able to do some very positive things in this budget. And I think the other thing that is glaring, and I know that there's a tendency for us to look locally when we have a gap, almost first, but I know in your legislative priorities, there's a glaring need for the state, for the Commonwealth, to fund the system of education, the high-quality system of education that it demands in its Constitution. And so I'm not saying that we don't advocate everywhere, but I think it's important for us to continue to look to the state where the additional accountability rigor has come from, where the additional legislative mandates are proposed and approved. We must continue to provide the appropriate advocacy there as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. Ms. Gaines, 4.01, next steps?
Steps. And looking at the next steps, based on what we've heard today in terms of feedback provided, we will move forward with the $3.1 million gap, with the understanding that over the next few days, we'll be working on the budget booklet. We'll be making sure that as you and Mr. Braswell prepare your PowerPoint presentation, we'll provide you with whatever support you may need, because you will be presenting to the Board of Supervisors on February 17th. Also, based on what we hear come in from the General Assembly crossover on February 10th, if we find that there's a compelling argument that we may get an additional $700,000, we will update the board as well. Also, what we do with the PowerPoint, when it's almost ready, the chair does share that with other members to get feedback. So that's what staff will be working on over the next 7 days. And then the General Assembly, they are scheduled to adjourn February 28th, and then you can kind of see the list going down.
Thank you. Mr. Laura?
Before we recess and before we leave this topic, just a small housekeeping matter. The budget does not include any compensation for the superintendent salary is not included in this budget. We need to, so I'd like to respectfully ask you, as we've done in the past, to name 2 members of this board to meet with the superintendent and work on his compensation package, also review and prepare the superintendent evaluation. That's something that this board needs to do. And in fact, when we do meet to talk about it, that is the one time that we're allowed to meet in the absence of the superintendent. But it's a minor housekeeping thing, but something that has to be done.
Thank you, Mr. Laura.
Thank you. Mr. Laura, if I may, while I appreciate your motion, your consideration, I can't control or request the board to do anything on that matter. The only thing I can say is I would certainly support that not being anything that the board needs to spend its time on over the next 6 months, other than my evaluation. So I ask that, and I appreciate your consideration.
That's part of it. We are, perhaps the most important thing that not the most important thing that we do, one of our requirements is to do an evaluation of the superintendent, and that's the role. So, and if in the process they start talking about compensation, well, that's a conversation that we're having. But I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Laura. And I will get back with the board, and we will, at the next meeting, we will look at if we have some volunteers to look at the compensation. Ms. Blaylock?
But if I was hearing our superintendent, I think that's off the table for right now. So we would not be looking at that the next meeting unless the board wanted to, correct?
Correct.
Then I would say we do not. Right now, we're in this budget cycle. I would honor his request. And other than our evaluations that are already in place, I would say we do not take any further steps at this time.
Okay. I see what you're saying, and I'm not hearing anything differently from any of the board members, so we will continue with that. Thank you, Mrs. Blaylock. Okay, we are going to take a short 5-minute break. School Board meeting with item 5.01, instructional calendar, presentation of options. Mrs. Flennard.
Thank you. This evening, we actually have 3 of the chairs of the calendar committee before us to present the calendar committee's work and some of the highlights for the board this evening. And we have Principal of Battlefield Middle School, Ms. Sheila Smith, and Principal of Battlefield Elementary, Susie Fines, and Principal of Massaponax High School, Dr. Joe Pisani. So thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for your work with the committee. And Ms. Smith, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Carol. Oh, I'm short, so I apologize. Hopefully, our presentation will also be short. Good evening, Madam Chair, school board members, Dr. Baker, Dr. Martin, and other fine educators. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you about our proposals for the 2015-2016 instructional calendar. You will notice in your handouts a list of members which comprise a calendar committee. This is a varied group of stakeholders. Our purpose is to propose options for the board to consider in regards to the instructional calendar for 2015-2016, to begin to develop options for the 2016-2017 school calendar to be proposed the first semester next school year, and to research instructional options for calendars in general. Our short-term objectives, while creating these calendar drafts, is to continue to meet and exceed state requirements. We want to ensure equitable instructional time across all levels, to ensure professional learning parity for all staff members, and to consider both a pre- and post-Labor Day calendar option. Our long-term objectives and research topics were covered in subcommittees and will continue to be covered through the next school year, are to adjust the starting time for each level. As you may know, some counties surrounding us have also considered the same topic, and to alternate instructional calendar models, including possible year-round schooling. At this time, Ms. Fines will share specific details related to the 2 options our calendar committee wishes to present for your consideration.
The calendar committee came up with 2 options, a post-Labor Day start and a pre-Labor Day start. The post-Labor Day start, did we move that over there yet? I can't see. Oh, I'm on the right one? Okay, I can't see. The post-Labor Day start was developed because community and staff surveyed indicated an interest in post-Labor Day start. The pre-Labor Day start was developed because of the late Labor Day next year, which is September 7th in 2015. And actually, a pre-Labor Day start would be 2 days earlier than the current instructional calendar. Also, a pre-Labor Day start provides more instructional time prior to AP testing, and it also allows additional instructional time before inclement weather sets in. The pre-Labor Day option begins on August 31st, 2 days earlier than our current instructional calendar. This would have school ending on June 10th. The post-Labor Day option has school beginning on September 8th and would conclude school on the 17th of June. Challenges associated with the pre-Labor Day option are that there is a week between the first report card issuance and conference nights. That's due to the Veterans Day holiday. The community has asked for evening events not to be held on a holiday. We found that this year. Also, another challenge is the community survey supported a post-Labor Day start. Challenges with the post-Labor Day calendar option. There is an unbalanced 9-week, the 9-week grading periods are a bit unbalanced. The first 9 weeks is 40 days, the second is 49 days, the third is 47 days, the fourth is 44 days. The last day of school with a post-Labor Day start is June 17th, which is much later than in past school year calendars. We did consider moving the end of the 9 weeks with this post-Labor Day start. However, Election Day is on November 3rd, which is typically a teacher planning and development day. Okay, Joe will talk to you a little bit about modifications to the calendar.
Sorry, I just need to raise the mic a little. Just a little. One of the things that we heard from the community and from the staff was having the additional half days for all 3 levels to balance all 3 levels for professional learning. So in the calendars, you'll see that all the pre and the post, sorry. Here we go, sorry. The pre and the post calendars both have those additional days built in. Also, you'll also notice that by having those 3 days, it allows us for some vertical professional learning as well as shared best practice. The middle schools have really sort of come out in the forefront for the shared best practice. They already have that model in-house for them. And of course, the high school principals wanted to steal that from them. But we also can do some vertical professional learning between, say, the elementaries, middle schools, and high schools. Additionally, the middle school and the elementary schools asked for additional half days at the end of the school year because of the sheer volume of things that they need to finish up. Aside from the student grades and the reports cards, there's also a lot of state reports that need to be done and have those in a timely fashion. So you'll see in both calendars that there is those additional days added for the middle school and the elementary school at the end. God bless you. One of the things that we also did in the calendar was to balance the academic day. Yes, I did it, okay. Balance the academic day for all 3 levels. In the past, the elementary school was 6 hours and 35 minutes, the middle school was 6 hours and 40 minutes, and the high school was 6:45. And we felt that it was in our best interest to have all 3 levels at 6 hours and 45 minutes. We did also take into consideration by doing this, making sure that we had sufficient gaps between the schedules for transportation, knowing the bus routes and the bus system that we need to use. And we thought that that was important to allow us some equity among all 3 levels and valuing that instructional time. I think that was really our key. So what do we need from you? We need you to consider 2 things. One, we need you to consider the calendar drafts that we're proposing, the pre and the post. And then we also need for you to consider those 3 modifications that we spoke about. The start time, the start day rather, not start time, not yet. The additional half days for the high school for professional learning and those additional days for the middle school and elementary school, half days at the end. And after that, we can field any questions that you might have.
Mrs. Blaylock.
Thank you, and thank you for your work on this committee and everyone who was involved. A few questions. Well, let me start with a statement. It was 2 years ago, I believe, when we went to post-Labor Day after being 7 years, pre-Labor Day, and prior to the 7 years, it was post-Labor Day. Am I correct? Before that? Okay. Yeah, Mr. Lower would know. And when we changed, this was a very, I did some extensive research along with my fellow board members. I think it was still wins as the most emails I have ever received as a school board member in favor of the post-Labor Day, winning, having both come back. And we went that way. So I was assuming we were staying that way. We knew 2 years ago that Labor Day could land late or early, just fluid, just like other things, just like I have a son born on Mother's Day. Every 5 years, his birthday will land on Mother's Day. So we knew it was going to be like that. So now it's like that we're kind of changing and throwing back into a pre-Labor Day start. Let me be clear when I say I'm not advocating for either one, but I feel like we set a standard yet again, and we're changing it again. That should not be happening right now. I did expect some calendars, but there's a lot of in the body of the calendar. The times of the day, I think that was great to look at, where the winter break lands, where the spring break lands, whether we do it before the Easter holiday, after the Easter holiday, half days, graduations, when we have those, or all of those things. So there's a lot to do, but the start date was never really what I thought we were looking at, but it sounds like we are. So as I'm listening, I hear the cons and the pros, but I didn't hear anything about the waiver. Do you still have to get the waiver, I'm assuming, to start before Labor Day?
Yes.
And is
Based
there-
on the days we missed last year, we would
Right.
qualify.
I'm sorry?
Based on the days we missed last year, we would qualify.
Right. Have you applied for that waiver? Has the division applied for that waiver at this point? But that is what was talked about 2 years ago. Now, you talked about a survey. Did you just do a recent survey for the?
No, we were referencing that survey from 2 years ago.
Okay. What were you saying the results were for the post Labor Day or pre-Labor Day?
That was a positive comment, that one of the
Was it?
gains for the post, one of the votes for the post was the community and staff had said that's what they wanted.
Right. So I would suggest we stay with that. And I mean, I don't know why we'd change the game on them right now. If we do, that's fine, but we need to stop, and we need to have a lot of time before we vote on this to let the community have, yet again, more input. Because if we're going to change their game, they need to be able to talk to us again. So, and that's fine. However we want to go, I'm willing to do that work. I just wanted to point out that it's only been 2 years, and we're already putting out something that goes back to the other. We knew then Labor Day might end late at some point. Actually knew it wouldn't end late this year. But the other question I have, now this is I have no motive behind this, but are there any divisions, this may be more for Mr. Wolf, is there any divisions that do not do midterms?
The one that I'm well aware of is Prince William County that ended up getting one of them. That's my understanding.
Okay, and I didn't know if there were any, was that a discussion at all, the midterm week, or was that always set in stone that we will continue with midterms regardless?
That is something we discussed, and we deferred to Ms. Flanard and Mr. Wolf on that issue.
What was the discussion on that? Would you share
Actually, the calendar committee did discuss exams, and then the calendar committee very much said that that's a larger instructional
Okay.
discussion that is more, really should be housed with the two of us, as well as the
Right.
principals and the community and teachers too, to talk about what are the pros and the cons and what are the instructional best practices. And so therefore, the calendar committee really would not broach that, because they really
Okay.
felt that that is an instructional piece and not a calendar.
Stays in instruction.
It stays in instruction. So
Yeah.
actually have brought
That's a
that
valid
back
point.
from the calendar committee to Mr. Wolf and Ms. Baleko as one of the things that we need to really discuss in the future.
Okay, that's a valid point. And I had just heard some feedback about that, and I wasn't sure where staff stands on that, where teachers who are given the midterm stand on that. Do they see it as a valuable resource that they must have, or is it something that we are, and that's a different conversation, it sounds like. So we'll separate that out to another time, but I just wanted to ask that question since it comes up sometimes when we talk about calendar. That's all the questions I had written down. Again, the work is amazing. I believe when we changed the calendar 2 years ago, it's one of the best calendars we have ever had in this county. So, and these are not short of that. I want to once again comment on the changing the times. I think that was very smart and good, and a good move towards the future. But I want to also reiterate, if we need to figure out what we want to do. Are we at pre-Labor Day or are we post-Labor Day?
It
Let's
was
just
not
figure it
the
out.
intent of the committee to ignore the survey results. We very much respect the results that we received 2 years ago. The two things I think that kind of stuck with us is the unevenness of the 9 weeks for that post-Labor Day calendar. It was 89 days in the first semester and 91 in the second. Because of that, we felt we wanted to show you what it would look like had we considered the pre.
Dr. Baker had wanted to mention something about the calendar.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with the board on Ms. Blaylock's observations about exams and the discussion there, because I think there's more than one issue, I think, that, from my understanding, has come up, and they've come up in conversations that I've had with various staff across the division, and exams is one. The other is because the calendar at a more of a macro level looks at time, the question is how far micro, how in-depth does this committee get into how time is utilized, by the hour, by the minute? And I think that they deferred that needs to be a more focused task force activity. And in addition to that, I know that block scheduling, the way that we schedule at the secondary level, has come up perhaps in need of a review at both middle and high school level. So I wanted to share that I think that's another positive that comes out of this committee, is the need to focus in on other areas, so that, because the one similarity in both of these calendars is it's 180 days. So we do want to take that work and then continue, because time is one of our greatest resources, and we need to continue to maximize the use of the time that that has been allotted through the instructional calendar. But I appreciated that.
Dr. Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and committee members, thank you. Having been part of that committee and heard a lot of the discussion that went on, the committee was well aware of the post-Labor Day start. It's only because of the impact of starting before and ending earlier, or starting after Labor Day and ending a week later, that raised the question, should they look at a pre? The impact of the irregular days that make up the periods, the 4 major grading periods. It's interesting that while we have greater number of days in the second half, but that's where we have our most days missed. We have to keep that in mind. Also, as was mentioned, time, one of the biggest, I think, influences or factors into going with the post-Labor Day, the decision, when we look at students in class, and if we start prior to Labor Day, but our students aren't with us because they're out of town, and then we start after Labor Day and we have to make up that week or 10 days before because the students weren't there, is that really being productive time? And I think that's a factor that we need to consider. It was a factor in my mind, because if we're talking about the importance of starting earlier so you can have them prepared for the tests, but if the students aren't in class, they can't be prepared. So to me, there's where the community has to say, because if they're willing to have school start before Labor Day, then their kids need to be in school. But if the community is not going to have the kids in school, then we'd better start then after Labor Day, where we know we have them, we're not repeating, even though it takes several days to get into the routine. But if you have to start that all over again, because I know when I was tracking the enrollment, it was quite obvious. The absenteeism on that week before Labor Day, or 10 days, was very, very significant. And that's what, was a major factor in my mind. So that when we made the decision a year ago, to go post, as Mrs. Blaylock said, that made the decision. Also, the fact that we were then consistent with our region.
Yeah.
Because of our regional programs. And that was a factor in my mind. So those two major factors, and knowing with the weather, I am very appreciative that the committee did take a look at corrections that needed to be made, and those were the modifications, and I think the committee did some very, very good work on that, with coming with some very good recommendations. And there was a lot of discussion around those points. So, my 2 cents. Thank you.
Mr. Laura.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Without a doubt, this is the toughest committee to serve. So, my hat is off to you. And don't hit me when I say this. Today must be Groundhog Day, because we have been through this before. I have heard all these arguments before, and we fought World War III, and we became a pre, and then we readjusted. We can't keep going back. We have to say to the community, we are a post-Labor Day for the reason that's been outlined all these years. We cannot keep reinventing the wheel. That, to me, is an easy decision. Post-Labor Day. Why? For all the reason that all these people have outlined all these years. Now, I do have a couple of questions for you, Dr. Pisani, only because I love you. I see here, that's the only reason, and it's not often I say that about a man, but I love you. Okay. In here, I see in this paper, and I'd like for you to comment on two issues. Year-round school, please comment on that. And the other one is, in your committee, did you talk about late start for high schools? Please.
The late start is actually not mine, but the year-round subcommittee is mine, so I'll address the year-round. And as you know, you've seen it in the news most recently, there are schools that are considering year-round school. One of the things that we were looking at in the idea of year-round school was to balance our academic time so that it had some symmetry all the way through the year, plus also trying to minimize that learning loss that occurs over the summer. So those were the two reasons that we started looking, and to be truthful, we looked out of the state of Virginia first, and then now that there are schools in the state of, school systems rather, in the state of Virginia who are considering year-round, we're going to start looking at their models also. But what we'd like to do is try to become more, to gain some more expertise before we come to speak about it, because I think we, as the committee, need to be prepared for the kinds of questions that you're going to have, and I don't think we're there yet. We're still trying to figure out how those year-round systems work, and is there truly an educational advantage to having it? And then if there is, what is it? What are, where the numbers say if it's truly an educational advantage? So that's, to answer your question, that's where we're kind of at right now.
Thank you, that's good. I know Virginia Beach have had year-round school, not at every school, but in some schools.
Yes.
For a number of years now. But
Sure.
it is something worth looking into. The same way, I don't expect that we're going to say, okay, next year, late arrival full school, but it's something that has to be studied. It has to be
Yes.
brought into the conversation, because there are divisions, Montgomery County comes to mind, Fairfax come to mind, where they're looking at this. And you all know the definition of insanity. So we all need to be looking at things.
I think
And
the
these are
critical,
some of the two issues that we need to look at.
and I think, Mr. Laura, you make a good point. The critical element, though, is there data that supports that year-round school benefits the children? And if it does, then I think there is the crutch we lean on, because we can turn to the families and say, this is really in the best interest of every child here in Spotsylvania County, and this is why, and here's the evidence that we've seen, and then come up with the plan that we think might work for us. And then, of course, present all of that information to you as a board so that you guys can discuss it. At least that's our goal.
I'm not advocating that we do this in this particular year,
Right.
but I'm simply advocating that we look into it, we study it. This is worth looking into, because it might be the kind of thing that future board, that we might want to do in the future. Thank you.
And I think the good side of my subcommittee is there are some folks that are on there that have a rather critical eye towards year-round. So we have to kind of convince them as well as preparing ourselves. So if we can convince them, that might be a feather in our cap as we bring it to you and say, look, we've actually convinced these people to agree to it. Why don't you take a look at what we have? Thank you.
Dr. Baker was going to give us a few more comments.
Yeah, I think Dr. Pisani did a really nice job of laying out the work that a long-range subcommittee is working on. But I wanted to follow back up so that as the board asks additional questions and provides feedback, that a couple things are clear as these folks stand before you. One is, Superintendent, I requested directly that there be 2 long-range perspectives explored in addition to preparing these calendars. One was the idea, are there alternative models that are employed that we believe could maximize our time investment with our children. And so can we look at time differently, and as a result, be able to know that we're going to substantially improve instruction and what our students need. And then the other one was to look at different start end times by level that are different than ours. Neither one of those are at a stage where anything's going to be imminent, but I wanted to make sure that it was clear so that a nice presentation like this doesn't fester into rumors of what we are planning to do. The plan is to plan. And to research. And I also wanted to make sure that it's clear as we look at it's my fault for the Groundhog Day feeling that you may be having, because I did not place on this committee any specific parameters that you do not look at pre-Labor Day, even though that was a recent shift that was not placed as a parameter on their work, that it's kind of an open process, which is, I think, why it's come to putting that back before the board. The other thing that I would encourage the board as we look at this, that any change that would be what I would call second order change that our community has never experienced, especially if many of our community are from Virginia or from areas where you have a traditional school schedule, is that to make any type of shift like that, one, we would have to have a lot of data and evidence in our favor to suggest that that is going to make a big difference in what we deliver as far as services to students. The other thing, and I can see the squirming of our finance staff because they're fully aware that that would have significant fiscal implications. As we have discussed in the first part of our meeting tonight, all of our budgetary needs and our need for additional revenue, I'm quite certain that when you go to a year-round type of model, that you have to look at an additional investment of resources that has to do with employee contracts, because we plan on meeting the needs of our students directly year-round if we are to consider that type of a schedule. So it would most certainly be something that fiscally we would have to determine how do we even have the means or the support in doing that. And then lastly, which is a big part of our strategic plan, ultimately our community would have to be fully engaged and have full understanding of why something like that would be of benefit to them and be able to be a part of that process. And so I just share those things because I think the foundation that has been set with that subcommittee is ongoing, and I would expect that they'll be able to continue to come back before the board and let you know of additional progress. And finally, and then I'll be quiet, it is unusual in our state to research a model, because we are one of the few states that has a law in place that forbids you to start pre-Labor Day without a waiver. So that is an immediate discouragement to explore such an offer. And I'm not using this as a commentary or a soapbox. That is another reality that as we explore that, we have to be aware of pending any changes in that law. Thank you.
I have 3 quick things on the General Assembly update list. There are 7 bills between the House and the Senate on this, and they are, I think this might be the first year they finally get it passed against the King's Dominion rule. But on what Dr. Myers said earlier, King George has already gone to pre-Labor Day start and approved that. So if we're talking about surrounding counties staying the same, I think that might be the trend that we're going to see this year, because a lot of parents are unhappy about being in school so late, because that's a late date. Well, those are the emails I've already gotten this year. And what was the other one I was writing here? Oh, as far as the instruction, my main concern is the AP tests. I mean, pre-Labor Day start just makes the most sense. We're actually giving them the most advantage to pass those tests that they are in school to get the advantage to take. So it seems silly for us to set them 5 days behind all their other peers in the country to try to pass those same tests.
Mr. Braswell.
Dr. Paisani and Ms. Fines and Ms. Smith, I just want to commend you for your work in leading your staff in this study. And I just had a couple questions. One was in your methodology. When we looked at the two courses of action, I only noticed that there was one distinct advantage for a post-Labor Day start, and there were several disadvantages for a post-Labor Day start. What level of I guess I want to say digging was involved to just only come up with one significant advantage for a post-Labor Day start?
I guess it depends on who you would speak to, but the calendar committee, after looking at the layout of 45 days, stop it, 45 days, stop it, 45, you count to get to 180 days, there were really no disadvantages or advantages other than we are meeting the needs of the community according to the survey. So I don't know how to answer your question other than we looked at the end product and said, this fits what the community wants. What else can we say?
Well, the recommendation that it seemed that it was steering us to was that a pre-Labor Day start was the only viable course of action. And based off of the information that was provided, I don't know if that's necessarily true. We're still fleshing that out, and my point is there has to be more advantages to starting in after Labor Day than just one. There has to be. I'm not saying that the one that was listed, that it was favored amongst the stakeholders, wasn't important. Of course, that's a very viable piece of data that needs to be evaluated, but there's other pieces of data that I feel are omitted so that we can make a good evaluation on should we start post or pre-Labor Day. In order to develop viable courses of action that can stand on their own, the assumptions and the facts have to flesh out those courses of action, and I didn't see that on the data. I'm not saying it to be critical, I'm just saying there has to be more to the study to come up with those courses of action than what we saw.
Dr. Baker?
I wanted to follow up. I think and I noticed that there was just the one bullet under the post-Labor Day start, and it's my assumption, and I can be corrected, but it's my assumption that if I'm recalling the survey a couple of years ago, that was the general consensus, but the rationale that came behind many of the responses to that survey were more than one thing.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that we just want post-Labor Day for more vacation time, or we want a post-Labor Day start because we don't understand why we've been pre-Labor Day. I think there were a few different things in there that I can recall, one of them being the opportunity to have sufficient time, not only in one summer, but as we look, the startup, the prep, getting us ready for that school year from an organizational perspective. I'm recalling that is one of the advantages to post, is that you're in a rhythm. You have the same number of weeks that in the summer that allow us to plan not only short-term but long-term professional development and how we utilize our summer school and our intervention and our extended day. And just that consistency, I think, in establishing that was important, whereas my observations of the pre-Labor Day before that was that it varied year by year, even the pre-Labor Day, as to what actual day there was a start. And I think that had felt disruptive to many folks, not only parents but staff, as from year to year it might start on a Tuesday, the next year it might start on a Wednesday, and so there was that inconsistency that I think, so one of the things that I think would probably be helpful is, and we can do this together, is to kind of tease out the pros and cons versus even advantages and disadvantages, because I think there are pros and cons that some of them are perception-oriented rather than impactful. But I think it's important because much of when you're looking at 180 days crafted two ways, separated by a week, I think to a large extent you do have to narrow down what are the prevailing perceptions that are going to rule the day until such a time as we have something that we know and have a lot of data is going to make an impact. And that leads me to the last thing I'll share, and it's back to the AP. If I'm not mistaken, we saw gains, though mild gains, minimal gains, minimal gains in AP performance over the last couple of years when we had post-Labor Day starts. And one, which was last year, was probably the least number of total days that unfortunately many of our AP teachers have had to work with in for quite a while. I don't know if you wanted to.
I was just going to add another piece that came out with the post that I recall from a couple of years ago was the consideration of students when they're transferring from districts. If we had a pre-Labor Day start, the post-Labor Day and some of the surroundings also having a post, there wasn't a chunk that they were missing or that we had to catch them up on because our starts were more matching. And so instructionally, when we received students from other divisions, it lined up a little bit easier for them in regards to our transfer kids.
And my point was, when we do the methodology, we have to sell it. And if we don't have all the facts on the table, it's really hard to sell one course of action over the other. I like the point that you made about there being a parallel between other divisions so that there's a common track that students are on. And that's a point that needs to be highlighted so that we can evaluate effectively which course of action makes sense for us. So that was the essence of my question.
No, and I do think that that's important, and that can be provided to the board members some additional considerations as you're trying to weigh the two drafts. The other thing that I think is important is, though I'm skeptical of any research we're going to have that shows that one of these calendar options is going to substantially impact student learning and achievement at another level. They're both solid calendars, but I do think that the question that we always have to ask ourselves, and I think that the committee is trying to ask this question consistently, is if we just begin with students, what is the schedule that is in the best interest of students, and is there any significant difference between those two calendars that is better for our students? Because with staff, we found, from my understanding, somewhat of a split in terms of what they have felt is best, and we sometimes have that split, not a direct split, but we even have community that may agree or disagree. But I think if we look at the whole as instructionally, is there any greater benefit to either? And if that's something else that can be brought back perhaps when the board meets again Monday for their consideration, or something else as they're receiving input, I think would be helpful.
Mr. Laura.
We have to consider what's at stake here. Students, parents, and staff. And we would do a disservice to our stakeholders if we keep switching around. People have to feel, and it's amazing, your typical American family, how far in advance we make plans. Just because we can doesn't mean that we should turn around and change people's plans. Look, there's a second grade teacher out here somewhere that has plans for next year, and she is counting on after Labor Day because we said so in the last couple of years. And she fought for it all those years that we were doing pre-labor. I think we have an obligation to that second grade teacher. And also there's a mom out here, for whatever reason, she is, and then we have a teenager that has a job at King's Dominion. And all of those reasons, those are all the reasons, and many others, why we went post-Labor Day. We can't change them. We made that decision, well, now we had to live with that. Especially in the absence of real, solid, academic argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laura. Mr. Blaine.
I think Mr. Pisani actually put his finger on the key, which I'll ask you in a moment, but as I think back about the surveys and so on, and the people I spoke with, the key was what was their personal need and their personal satisfaction, personal needs, period. The tradition of after post-Labor Day and the stability is key to once we establish something. People are making their next year's vacations right now, and we're still talking about this. Some people in business have selected their vacations last October and September for next year. I mean, we're months behind. So that's the tragedy, I think. But you put your finger on what is best for kids. And so my question to you folks is, of what you've offered here, what is your decision and recommendation about the choices that are available, which will be best for our students?
Either calendar.
You don't care.
I have to say I agree with Dr. Baker in that it's not when, it's that we do. We meet with the students 180 days. What we do in that 180 days is what's most important, not when we do those 180 days.
The dilemma is I say to you, hey, look, I want to go to Los Angeles. How do I get there? You say, well, we don't care. Just go. You get there eventually. I mean, I'm asking for the direction that you feel is best for kids. Now, if they're equal, if that's what you're saying.
I think they are saying that as they plead the fifth. But,
Okay.
right, but I do think that, and I will also take responsibility as superintendent why we don't have calendars, another 2 years of calendars already in the wake, or 3 years, because I think then it compromises the board's ability to long-range plan, because then you're in the awkward position as a board of saying, well, it's already approved 2 years from now, which means that if you were to amend it, what kind of disruption would that cause to folks' plans? So one of the things to expedite the 16-17 calendar, and that was mentioned by our folks in their presentation, is I would like to keep the group together in terms of continuity to continue on beyond the board's decision on the final product for now, and then continue into the fall. And so we do expect that the decision for 16-17 will come earlier, but it also allows the group to continue their research on some of the longer range projects and continue to gather additional data.
I did have a couple questions, though, as well. With the first 9 weeks being 40 days and the second 9 weeks being 49 days, is there going to be any adjustment to the curriculum maps and pacing guides?
Would you like me to take that?
Please.
Okay, thank you. The first piece that we really want to make sure is the professional learning communities that our teachers do have. And I do recall that in the past, we were given a map and thou shall follow it to the hour, I think. And we have done a tremendous amount of work about the professional learning community, within the professional learning communities, to say what is our students' needs, and are we basing that on some pre- and post-test data? So we certainly have timeframes that we can make adjustments, but I would always say regardless of a guide that's provided, is that we need to, at that level, whichever level we're talking about, look at our students' needs and look at the actual guides and adjust it according to the instructional needs of our kids. So I just want to make sure that I put that out there, but we always look at amending guides.
I love that answer, so thank you very much. And then I had one more question about the inclement weather days, and maybe I'm misreading it, but it says inclement weather days will be made up beginning on the 6th day in this order, but then it says day 1 is February 1st. Is that something that needs to be corrected?
You found a typo.
Yes, you did.
And we've had 400 eyes review this, and I'm very thankful that you found the typo. As this year, we made up the first 2, as you all know, we did discuss continuing that practice for next year, so we will make those adjustments I can tell Ms. Smith is already writing to make,
Redlined, already redlined.
so that
Fixed
we
it.
make that adjustment. Thank you very much for catching that.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions for Mrs. Blaylock?
Just a quick question, and I certainly don't have an opinion. I'd want our high school principals, along with Mr. Wolf, to decide this, but was there any conversation on our graduation moving to when school is out, or I see it staying? Was there discussion? And I have no background on this. so
There
I'm
is a
not-
discussion, and we continue to
What's-
look into that. So far, we have
Yeah.
nothing definitive as of
Yeah.
yet, so, but we continue to, we just began our discussions on that the other
Okay.
day, so there's going to be some follow-up.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to follow up with what Mrs. Blaylock said, though, about the graduations. With us being, if we continue with the post-Labor Day start, the last day of school would be June 17th. If we had graduation that same weekend, we do have students who start summer classes probably that following day. So that's just, the following week.
Are you referencing summer school?
I'm sorry, summer, as students who graduate. I've just heard of students who have to go start some programs very early or in late June. So right now, on this calendar, I see graduation would be June 10th and 11th if it was the post-Labor Day start. I kind of like seeing that because of the last day of school being late. Are there any more comments, or Dr. Meyer?
I think, having served on the committee and heard a lot of the discussion, and as I said earlier, the pre was presented as an option because of the lateness of the post. But we had a lot of discussion when the board had its deliberation as to which calendar we were looking at. And it was known, as Mrs. Blaylock said, that day moves. But we were trying to establish consistency. And so, and when I heard the presentation into what Mr. Braswell has said, it spurred me to making that comment about, one of the factors that led us to a post-Labor Day start was both calendars are the same, 180 days. It's just when you begin, when you end, it's 180 days. How you break it up, how you use your intermissions. But if the students aren't in school, it doesn't do any good. Get back to the finances. If the kids aren't in school, we're not getting our reimbursement from the state because it's ADM, average daily membership. It's attendance. If they're not in school, we lose. So, to me, for financial reasons, also for educational reasons, this was where the community, the third prong, is so critical. We can make a decision, but if that's not what the community wants, it went to hell in a handbasket. Nothing you can do is going to change it. We need to, that's where the three have to be together. We as the board, the staff, the students, and the community, the parents, we have to be on the same track. And to me, that's so critical. If the mindset is where we can get our best attendance and be able to have our greatest influence and greatest efficiency, we're not losing time, and if it's a post-Labor Day, it's post-Labor Day. And there's where we establish what our criteria is. And we had that discussion 2 years ago. And last year we set the schedule for 2 years. I know why it came up at committee. I fully understand that. That's part of the committee, but, I think the committee's looking for direction from the board so that it can get back to work. And I'm not sure what is it that you're asking of the board for this evening is where my final question is. What do you want us as a board to do?
That was going to be my next question.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr. Meyer. What do you want from us? Do you want us to say this is what we want to be voted on next week?
I think that we wanted to do this tonight. The close of the budget work session because we knew that time was beginning to get away, and we wanted to have the board begin considering drafts, and knowing that it's a hot topic within our community and our staff, that you could begin to consider what's been presented tonight. In terms of the decision and when the board wants to make that is certainly at the pleasure of the board. So I would certainly say that if the board needs at least one additional week or 3 additional weeks up until the 23rd, the board can take that, or the board can vote tonight, can vote on the 9th. It's certainly up to you as a board. But now those drafts have been provided. If there's additional information, I think we noted some additional information that was requested that we can provide. But outside of that, it is certainly within your decision-making now.
I'm looking at my board members, but what are we looking at presenting, and this is a consensus, presenting both calendars and letting the public, do we want one calendar to have presented to us? We can vote next week at our next board meeting so that we can have public comment. We can vote in 3 weeks when we have our next board meeting in the 23rd of February, I believe is the date. But I want to hear from the board members and see what are your thoughts on this?
Madam Chair, this is the kind of decision that impacts on the entire community. Therefore, the sooner we act on it, the better. I can only speak for myself. I am ready to vote next week, so that'll be my suggestion at the next board meeting, and I am 100% post. For years, there have only 2 issues that appealed to me that have been important to me in the calendar. Number one, that Veterans Day is a school day for obvious reasons, and number two, 2 years ago, I supported. I was in favor of the because we heard the argument, but then 2 years ago, we heard the arguments, and we're back. We can't go back. We can't continue going back. So therefore, it's easy for me to say, post, and we need to let the community know, we have an obligation to our staff. Let them know that, look, we're not wavering from this. Go ahead and make your plans. Leave your plans as, if you plan for post-Labor Day, leave them as they are. We are with you. But we need to make that decision quickly rather than leaving people out there flopping in the wind. And I'm not looking forward to seeing a whole bunch of emails in my box about trying to convince me about a pre-Labor Day or asking me for a post-Labor. Either way, it should not be an issue that we should be putting out there in the community. Let's go with it and let's be decisive about it. Thank you.
Dr. Meyer.
I think I've expressed my opinion twice on the same subject. I'm definitely leaning toward post. I haven't seen reason that changes that. Thank you.
Ms. Blaylock.
I, too, support both my colleagues that have spoken previously and expressed my opinion as well.
Mr. Blaine.
Absolutely. We need a decision, and it has to be made, and it should be made, and everybody's I happen to like the pre-post, or the pre-Labor Day long. I'd move it up another week, frankly. But the community likes, the community likes it after Labor Day. We should go with it.
Thank you. Ms. Grant.
I concur. At this particular point, we just don't have enough information. I didn't hear enough information or a compelling reason why we should go back. And I kind of liken it to a story that I shared with Dr. Baker a couple weeks ago. There was a bear and a wolf and a fox, and they all decided they were going to go hunting. And each one of them were very successful in their hunt, and they brought down a deer. And the bear came up to the wolf and said, Mr. Wolf, how should we divide the spoils of our catch? Well, the wolf was a little bit perplexed, and he said, well, it seems pretty obvious to me. Fox caught a deer, I got a deer, you got a deer, we all have a deer apiece, and the bear ate him immediately after he got done saying that. So the bear came to the fox and said, how should we divide the spoils of the catch? The fox said, well, that's pretty simple. I think you should take the wolf's deer and then take my deer as well and have it for yourself. And the bear was really perplexed at his wisdom and was really just super impressed. And he says, "Where did you get such wisdom from?" And he said, "From the wolf." So with that being said, I think we've already heard that it's not in our best interest to keep going back and forth with the public.
Okay, from hearing from my board, it sounds like at the next board meeting, put it on the agenda for the calendar. Thank you.
Can I get some clarification, Madam Chair? Will they be bringing back both, or are we going to just bring back the post since you do have the consensus?
I think we're going to bring back the post-Labor Day because we have a consensus, and only the post-Labor Day, with the corrections made. Thank you.
May I also ask that you consider the 6-hour, 45 minutes for all levels? That was the other proposal we had at the table.
I would concur that the committee brought that with those accommodations or modifications, because those address issues that were brought up, and the committee definitely wanted to address those issues.
So we'll be looking at starting and stop time as well as the
With the modifications.
the modifications. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Comments, Dr. Baker? Okay. Well, we are on to 6.01, closing comments, and Dr. Baker has none. And I want to just say thank you to everyone for being here. You've worked very hard. Calendar Committee, thank you so much. Lots of hard work. And do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Grant, and a second by Ms. Blaylock. All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? No. 7-0. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.